Today I thought about Project Pluto. That time the United States Atomic Energy Commission and the United States Air Force got together and decided to maximize the nuclear part of their nuclear arsenal. I know it sounds like a bad idea, but let me explain. It was the 1950s, because of course it was. The US had just dropped two nuclear bombs on Japan. They had just figured out how to make mini suns and throw them at nations. They were the biggest, baddest bully around the block. They felt like they had unchallenged authority on the global scale, which they did for a hot minute. But then some scientists on the US side defected. Now the USSR also had nuclear technology. Their biggest rival on the global stage also has nuclear technology. So obviously they needed to one-up them. They needed to come up with something even better. But they had just poured a lot of money and resources into developing nuclear power. So instead of trying to develop something even newer, they just thought, how about we make it more nuclear? How about we make a nuclear bomb and make it the most nuclear? The nuclearest, if you will. And in the same line of thought, they looked at their nuclear missiles and saw that, sure, the warhead part of the missile was nuclear. But they were still using the old, boring, conventional, decomposed dinosaur as fuel to propel that warhead and take it to its intended target. And since they had figured out nuclear energy, they figured, hey, why not just use nuclear energy to power the nuclear missile? A nuclear-powered nuclear missile. So the idea was to use a ramjet engine powered by nuclear energy that would propel the nuclear missile to its intended target. Essentially, a nuke-powered nuke, a nuclear energy-driven nuclear missile. Now, if you're not absolutely familiar with the functioning of a ramjet engine, I will give you the simplest explanation that I can. A ramjet engine works on the principle that cold things contract and hot things expand, and the same thing works on air. So a ramjet engine takes in cold air from one side, heats it up inside, and uses the expansion of that hot air, expelling out the back for propulsion. Now, how would they use nuclear energy to power this ramjet engine? You need to heat up the air, and nuclear reactions generally cause a whole bunch of heat. So they just decided to stick an unshielded nuclear reactor inside the engine, and the nuclear reaction inside the engine would heat up the cold air, which would cause it to expand, and the engine would then expel the expanded cold air and use that for propulsion. Only problem being, the nuclear reactor being unshielded, that expanding cold air is now heavily radioactive. Well, we'll get to that. So they looked at this design and decided it wasn't nuclear enough and thought, hey, how about we also make it a nuclear bomber? And therefore, a new kind of nuclear trifecta was born. One missile, three types of destruction. It was called a SLAM, supersonic low altitude missile. By the way, SLAM is just an awesome name for a missile. Now on to the three phases of destruction that this proposed missile would cause. Phase 1, the flight itself. The missile flying over the enemy territory would itself cause a bunch of damage. Number 1, the supersonic and low altitude part of the missile was itself damaging to infrastructure. The proposed missile would fly at the speed of Mach 3 at the altitude of 150 meters, and the missile flying at such a low altitude at 3 times the speed of sound would cause continuous sonic booms exceeding 200 decibels, which would deafen and flatten everything along its path. It would cause damage to infrastructure and might even cause physical injury to people right below its flight path. And it definitely would cause unaliving or long naps for people directly below its flight path. Why? Because of the unshielded nuclear reactor. The unshielded nuclear reactor, which would emit lethal gamma radiation continuously out the back, which would cause anybody under the flight path of that missile to get anywhere from 400 to 600 REM doses of radiation per second, which would be fatal within seconds. On top of that, the reactor's exhaust would also spew fission byproduct, for example, cesium-137, which would cause lasting radioactive damage. Dr. Edwin Lehman of the UCS has stated that even before reaching its target, the missile would be a flying death factory. The Nevada National Security Site has stated that it would deafen, flatten, and irradiate people along its flight path. And all of that was just Phase 1. Now we come to Phase 2, the bomber part of the bomber missile. Meaning, do you remember how I said they decided to make it, instead of just a missile, a bomber missile? Yeah, that's the part that comes into play now. So, the missile had a primary payload that it would deliver to the primary target. Well, it could also carry anywhere from 14 to 26 additional nuclear warheads, which it would deliver to secondary targets along the way to its primary target. That was Phase 2. Now we come to Phase 3, the final phase, where the missile would deliver its primary payload by flying itself into the primary target, hence detonating the main nuclear warhead. The scary part is, since it was a nuclear powered missile, a nuclear powered nuclear missile, the final strike could come days or even weeks after the initial launch. Because of being a nuclear powered missile, it had a massive range of 4.5 times around the Earth, meaning it could just be flying over the enemy territory for days, maybe even weeks, just deafening, flattening, and irradiating everything underneath its flight path, and also dropping anywhere from 14 to 26 additional nuclear warheads. So these were the three phases of destruction that this proposed missile would achieve. Now let's talk about how they were going to go about it and how frighteningly close they came to actually make this thing. On 1st January 1957, the United States Atomic Energy Commission selected Lawrence Radiation Laboratories, which was a federally funded R&D center in California, to study the feasibility of applying heat from a nuclear reactor to power a ramjet engine. And the study found that the project was very feasible. The testing was then moved to newly built testing facilities in Nevada. The newly built facility was the 21 square kilometer NTS Site 40, built for $1.2 million or $9 million today. It was also called Jackass Flats. The first test engine was the Trolley 2A. Then later on, a final test was conducted on a much larger, fully functional engine called the Trolley 2C. This project was scrapped because some people at the Pentagon realized that if they make this thing, the USSR will also try to copy them, just like they did with the nuclear bomb. And while they might be able to exercise some prudence and some caution, the same cannot be said for the communists. Well, if they don't make it, the Russians will definitely never try to make this thing, right? Official reason for stopping this project was public perception, which understandable. My working theory is that the US has a bunch of alien raccoons under their employ that are fueled by crime and crack, and those are the people they call their scientists. And that is what they have at Area 51. Otherwise, how could you come up with ideas like this? Every single thing, every weapon system that you might think is absolutely cuckoo and out of this world and would never happen, and some country decides to make a futuristic new weapon, the US has already tried it and has deterrents against it. It is not possible to do this except with alien raccoons fueled on crime and crack. Well, that's it about Project Pluto. Do like, share and subscribe. Give me your thoughts in the comments. That's all for today.